If you're unhappy with how your church sound system sounds, you might be unsure of what steps you need to take to make it sound better and be easier for your volunteers to use. So today we're taking a 10,000-foot overview of your entire sound system so you can know what is going to make the biggest difference and so you can find the weakest link and improve that. Hey, if we haven't met yet, my name is James and I help church sound techs, worship leaders, and tech directors eliminate the mystery and frustration with sound at church. If that's you, you've found the right place. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and welcome to the club of sound ninjas. A lot of people, when they talk about sound systems, they want to take you through the signal flow or how things go from the sound source all the way to the destination. And that's helpful if you're engineering a sound system, but a better way to think about it is your sound system is kind of like a building with the foundation, pillars, and then finishing touches. So this is what I'm going to describe to you today is my way of thinking about a sound system and the ways that we can improve things and the different types of work it takes to improve those things as well. First, we're going to take a look at the foundation of our sound system. This is what I consider the sound system design, or the placement and types of speakers that we have, our system tuning, or how we fine-tune with EQ and timing and levels all of those speakers so that they work well together, and then our console setup. Just like the foundation of a building has different layers, this has different layers as well. And the speaker system design is the trickiest one to get right and the hardest one to update after you've done it and employed your sound system. In order to cover our listening area well, so that the parts in the front don't sound different from the parts in the back, and there aren't places where it's much louder or much quieter, or more specifically, less bright or more bassy, we have to design our sound system well so that we get low variance across the listening area. In short, this is the right speakers in the right place, pointed the right way for your congregation's needs. This is also where we choose the difference between sound reinforcement and live mixing. Sound reinforcement has meaningful sounds coming from off the stage, so that people in the audience, even without any sound system, would hear something going on. Whereas live mixing keeps a quiet stage, and we try to control all the noise possible, but everything that the audience hears comes through the sound system. Neither one of these are right or wrong, but they do have their own pros and cons. Most churches are leaning toward live mixing though, and quieter stages are becoming the norm, with in-ear monitors replacing monitor wedges on stage, and silent guitar amps and drum cages and the like. The next step toward building a great sound system is the system tuning aspect. This makes sure that each speaker and all of its components are working properly, and that the tone is the same between the front and the back, and we can use different tools like delay to add more speakers toward the back of the room without there being a timing difference, which makes things less intelligible. Hiring someone to come out and tune your speaker system can be beneficial and make upgrades, but you have to have the right speakers in place first before you're going to get truly great sound in your church. If you don't know what you're doing with system tuning, I recommend hiring somebody else to do it, or at least make sure that you know how to save how it is now so that when you start tweaking things, you can at least revert back to what it was. There's a very real process of knowing enough to be dangerous that we want to avoid with our church sound systems. Just because you can make your hi-fi system sound good doesn't mean you can take those same concepts and apply them to our professional sound system. The final part of our foundation, and the easiest one to get to and make changes on, is our console setup. When your soundboard is set up in a way that's easy for volunteers to understand, and things are laid out in a logical way, and we can control the things that we need to at the right time for the transitions in our worship service, everything works much, much better. Another aspect of our console design is how we set up the monitoring system, or how the musicians on stage hear themselves. You might also have a setup where you can run broadcast and front of house from the same board. Additionally, you might choose to use a second board or a digital audio workstation for your broadcast mix. When you're choosing your console setup and how many setups you have to consider your resources, and that goes beyond just the finances. A lot of churches that are running two different consoles for front of house and broadcast, and either a console or digital audio workstation, but either way, it takes two people to run it every week. That can put a strain on your volunteer crew. So just because you have the finances to buy the gear, make sure that you have the personnel that are trained to run it. All right, that wraps up our foundation, but now we're on to the 4 pillars that make great sound at church. When we have our speaker system and our console set up, these are the things that we need next in order to get great sound for our congregation. The first one is a great sounding sound source, and this is where the team effort comes into play. Your sound tech cannot be relied upon to make the guitar player sound good if they don't sound good. In addition, even though we can do stuff like vocal tuning, which I highly recommend, it won't make a bad singer sound good, or a band that falls apart and doesn't play in time and in tune, or the right chord at the right time. We can't fix any of that with the sound system, so we have to fix that at the source. If you're finding that this is your weakest link, it might be worth it to invest in more and better instruments for your worship team. For your church, maybe that means you get a new keyboard that has better sounds that fit in the mix a little bit better. Maybe it means a house acoustic guitar so that somebody doesn't have to spend $2,000 or $3,000 on their personal instrument, but they can use the church's when they're playing at church. Maybe that means a new drum kit, or more likely, it means actually changing the heads on your drums so that they're tuned and stay in tune and don't sound really flabby. In addition to having great sounding instruments, we also have to make sure that the band is playing well together and playing parts that fit well together. So not everybody is playing the same notes with the same rhythms across different instruments. Then there's not really a lot of sonic space, or we're going to have trouble distinguishing one instrument from another one. If they play with different rhythms or different parts of the note spectrum, then each one can fit together better, and that's really the art of a great arrangement. And that happens on stage before anything arrives at the sound booth. Making sure that the instruments themselves sound good before they even reach a microphone, that's the first pillar of great sound at church. Now, because I just mentioned microphones, that's our second pillar, or we have to capture our sound sources in the right way. And often that means either microphones or direct boxes. If you don't have the right mic or the right DI for your inputs, then you're going to introduce noise or have extra stuff in the sound system that you don't want and is causing a distraction. Now, beyond just buying the right gear and setting it up the right way, it has to be used in the right way. And what I mean is that the microphones have to be pointed in the right direction in the right place. So for singers, that means keeping the microphone really close to their mouth so that it's picking up their voice and not all the noise around them. For drums, it means pointing the microphones in the right spot. And the short version is you keep the microphone over the rim of the drum and point it toward the center or where it's going to get hit. For guitars and keyboards that go direct, it means using a direct box or a line isolator to get the signal to the soundboard the best way possible so we get the cleanest signal. At this point, we're trying to eliminate noise and we're trying to get the right tone out of the instrument. Now, if you're not a microphone nerd like me, you might not know that different mics sound different from one another. So sometimes getting the right tone on a great sounding instrument means using a different microphone. It's not that they're better or worse, it's just they're kind of like running shoes. They have to just fit. And so sometimes a great mic doesn't sound good on every single source. Sometimes you just have to switch up the mic, either for the singer, the drum, or the guitar player, to get it to sound right. Now that we've captured the sounds into our sound system, the third pillar is balance and gain structure. Gain structure is the way that we turn up the different components within the sound system and specifically on the soundboard to get the levels right so that we can use it the best, both for our mix for front of house, for the monitor mix, and for the broadcast mix. Most of this happens on the soundboard's preamp or gain so that we get the level up to the appropriate place where we can use it. From there, we can now use the faders on the board to balance our mix. And balancing a mix is part of the soft skills that you have to have in order to get a great sounding sound system for your church. It's not just that you can set it in a very technical way and say, this is appropriate, and then you're good to go. Balancing the mix with the faders is the art of knowing which instruments and voices need to be highlighted and how they interrelate with one another so that everything can be heard and every part of the arrangement is in a good place. There are things that change with the different songs, and there's musical things that need to come forward and backward in the mix. And the overall mix might need to get louder and quieter during certain times. So it's important to invest in the soft skills of your sound techs and not just get your sound system set up correctly so that they can adapt to the differing parts of your worship set and do it in a way that's musical and pleasing to the ear. The The fourth pillar of great sound at church are our high pass and low pass filters, or HPF and LPF. These will cut off and reduce the level of extreme low and high frequencies on our input channels. And as we're getting the levels right and balancing them well, sometimes we need to remove some of the things that aren't necessary on each individual input to really clean up our mix and make things sound much clearer. For instance, you may have seen someone speaking on stage with a microphone close to their mouth, like what I just told you to do a minute ago. But when they say P sounds, those plosives pop through the sound system and it makes a big boom that's distracting. The high pass filter will reduce the level of those low frequencies so those distracting pops don't come through the system. A high pass filter and low pass filter are also kind of a bridge to our finishing touches, or our first finishing touch, which is EQ, but we'll talk about that more in just a second. When you set the high pass filter or the low cut, this is getting rid of unwanted low frequencies. And my general rule of thumb for teaching people how to use the high pass filter is to start turning it up until you start to notice that the input sounds thin. Then you can back it off just a little bit until it sounds natural again, and now we're in a happy medium of not having those unwanted low frequencies, but also not affecting our input in a negative way. We do the same thing with our low pass filter. It can get rid of unwanted noise and unnecessary high frequencies that are making our mix not sound so great. If we overdo it, all of our inputs will sound dull, and we don't want that. We want to let the stuff that should have high frequencies keep those high frequencies, but we want to let other inputs that don't necessarily need it get rid of more of those high frequencies. Now we're on to our 3 finishing touches for great sound at church. If you've gotten the rest of this stuff up to this point, you've got about 85% of a great mix. And so if you can focus on those and make sure that they're great, the rest of these will become much, much easier. These finishing touches will not correct the things that you have wrong on the earlier pillars or even the foundation. So with that, let's jump on to EQ. EQ is a tool for balancing different parts of the frequency spectrum. Just like on our input channels, we have different faders for different instruments. With the EQ, we can turn up and down different parts of the frequency spectrum, all the way down from the lowest of low frequencies to the highest of high frequencies, and everything in the middle, we can move those around independent of what our fader is doing. So I call our fader the broadband EQ because it turns all the frequencies up and down. Then when we've got that in the right place, we can take the fine tuning a little bit more with taking up and down certain parts of the frequency spectrum. Now, one skill that's going to be essential for things to sound good at your church is learning how to EQ vocals. A great vocal mic in front of a great singer does not automatically sound good. There are things about the way that the microphone is designed that requires some EQ in order for it to sound natural. I could go into all of that right now, but instead I'll drop a link to that video down in the description below. Although I have to say, once you get great at EQing vocals and they sound clear, it is a huge boost to your confidence. You're really going to want to master this skill and learn how to adapt to different singers and the way that they sing so that they can sound great every time. If you're after a rock sound for your drums, those will also need some EQ. Even if you have great drums and great drum mics and a great drummer, EQ is essential to getting that rock and roll sound out of your drum kit. Most other instruments will be okay without a lot of EQ. So if you kind of get lost and don't know what you're doing with the EQ, try bypassing it or turning it off and see if that makes it sound better. You might be surprised that sometimes you're getting yourself more into a pickle than less. The next finishing touch is compression. Compression is a way to automatically turn down signals as they get too loud in your mix so that things don't get out of control, and it can help make the quieter parts of that signal closer to the sound of the louder parts of that signal. As you might have already guessed, this is especially helpful with vocals, because singing properly requires that a singer gets much louder in certain parts and much quieter in certain parts, sometimes in the same phrase. So if we want every word in that phrase to be intelligible, and if people are coming to sing along with the worship leader, we want our vocals to be heard and heard clearly all the time. Compression is also an essential part of getting a great broadcast mix. In our live mixes, we want all the energy and dynamic range of things getting really loud and then getting really quiet again. And our ear in a room full of people is expecting that and really enjoys that. It's a really great thing when we get our dynamics really big in our live services. But over a broadcast, people at home are listening on smaller speakers that don't sound quite as good, so they don't turn them up to the same levels that we have it when we're worshiping in a congregation together. What this means is that the loud parts, they're going to set to a much quieter, so then the quiet parts, if we don't adjust for that, they're going to be much quieter, and they're going to have to crank up their TV or computer all the way to 90, and then they get a little bit scared when the music starts again and it's super loud. To keep that from happening, we have to be careful about the way that we use compression for our broadcast mix so that our dynamic range isn't as big as it is for our in-person services. It can also help us to get our drums loud enough on the stream without them clipping the main output or our entire mix being too quiet. Of course, there's way more that I could talk about on this subject, and I have in some other videos. I'll be sure to drop them down in the description below. But compression is a lot of fun when you get the hang of it, and it can be a real blessing for you when things kind of stay in the right place with their dynamics, both for your in-person sound and for the broadcast. The final finishing touch we're going to talk about is effects. These are reverbs and delays that we add to the signal to make it feel like it's in a bigger space than we're in. So reverb is a way of artificially simulating the reflections and the room sounds of a certain type of space. It could be a very small space. It could be emulating a very large space. It could add some sustain to certain notes on our singers so that they sound like their notes are hanging on a little bit longer. And it can cover some of the imperfections that happens when people are playing and singing live music. Delay is a way to add a rhythmic repeat to usually our vocals so that they have a little bit more bounce to them, and we can even add and highlight certain phrases at, say, the end of a line. If there's one word that we want to repeat, we can use a delay that's timed to the music to add a repeat to that. And as a sound tech, it is one of the most fun things that you can do because finally you're drawing a little bit of attention to yourself and adding in something to the mix. Most everything else in the mix just comes from on stage. Effects are things that we add back at the sound booth. Now, one thing that I get asked a lot is how to incorporate plugins into your soundboard to use at church. Plugins are software emulations of different hardware, either EQ, compressors, or different processors that when we can use them live, it adds an extra tool that's not necessarily built into our soundboard. Many of these are sprinkles on the icing on the cake. They're really not essential to getting great sound, but if you haven't done all the previous steps of getting your sound system designed right and tuned right, setting up your console well, getting great sounding inputs, plugins aren't gonna make that big of a difference, except for one. Vocal tuning is a great way to make some things that might be a little more distracting, less distracting, especially when people are listening online. I actually put vocal tuning plugins kind of back in the 4 pillars section where we're getting a great sound source. Sometimes somebody just needs a little bit of help to get right in the center of a pitch. They might be a great singer, but their pitch isn't super perfect. Now, in a live situation, this usually gets glossed over and it sounds great and everybody's loving it. It's just sounds fantastic. But in a broadcast, it feels very bare, or there's nothing really covering it. It's like every cent or 1/100th of a pitch off is really noticeable on a broadcast. So having vocal tuning that's transparent, that just kind of nudges people in the right direction of the center of the note, I think is a fantastic way to set up plugins and to help your broadcast sound better. I would venture to say that 99.9% of the vocals that people hear in recorded music now has pitch correction on it. And so we are very, very accustomed to hearing vocals that are right in the center of the pitch. Now, you go back 30 years and you listen to some of the recordings then, and they're not exactly right in the center of the pitch. And we thought it was fine then, and the singers that we hear now live, they still sound great. But for a recording, or more specifically for a broadcast, it's just really helpful to eliminate that distraction by adding some vocal tuning plugins. Now, the technical details for setting all that up goes beyond the scope of this kind of 10,000 foot view video, but I'll put a link to that video down in the description below. Now, we've talked about the overview of how all the different parts fit together, and we've talked about some of the soft skills that our sound techs need in order to master making the sound system sound great. But one of the best ways to practice that is with virtual sound check. It allows you to record individual inputs coming from off the stage stage and then play them back through the soundboard as if there's a band on stage without actually having to have the band there right then. It allows the sound tech to be able to practice by themselves, to make things sound really bad without a room full of people listening to them, and practice going through the steps of balancing the mix, or EQing vocals, or EQing that one tricky vocal that sounds normal most of the time, but there's this one section of the song where they sound weird and they just can't get it right. I may be speaking from personal experience there, but Virtual Sound Check is amazing for being able to practice the soft skills of running sound without including a whole band there to make noise for you. Because it's such an important part of developing the skills of church sound techs, I made the Virtual Sound Check Challenge that walks you through all the equipment that you need and how to hook it up with step-by-step directions on many consoles and recorders so that you can get it set up on your board and have it easy to practice and improve your soft skills in many of these areas. It's all free, and I'll put a link to sign up down in the description below. Hey, thanks for joining me and taking a look at the 10,000-foot view of how to improve your church sound system. If you liked this video and want to see more stuff like it, go ahead and mash that thumbs up and hit subscribe, and don't ding the little bell. You don't need any more notifications in your life. And remember, it's all about the low end, avoid the sound tech solo, and nobody leaves church humming the kick drum. We'll see you back here next time on Attaway Audio.